just by way of review, I want to notice the 3 levels of sin that we talked about in the earlier class. In Jude 22 and also in verse 23, it says, "And have mercy on some who are doubting, save others, snatching them out of the fire, and on some have mercy with fear, hating even the garment polluted by the flesh." So basically, when we first start our class tonight, we're going to be talking about how to win an argument with men who are in these first 2 categories. Some who are doubting, people who are perhaps sinning out of ignorance or just getting involved, they're not really steeped in the sin. And then there are others who are a little bit more involved in sin, and it's going to take a little bit more effort to get them out of the sin, but yet it is still possible because they are not steeped in their sin. And of course, what we're going to be learning is going to be applicable also to men. If a man has a wife who is abusive with her anger, then he can use these same techniques to turn their arguments around and make the fighting between them fair. Then at the end of our class, we're going to be talking about how to apply some of these principles to people who are really steeped in their sin, or some who are wearing even the polluted garment. And we talked about in an earlier class how that polluted meant the undergarment, that the pollution is so bad that it soaks through your outer garments and onto your inner garments. So these are people who are really steeped in their sin. And while we're dealing with wife abuse, something that has weighed very heavily on me ever since I first started teaching these classes on abuse, is that we're talking about a life and death situation. There are 4,000 women killed in the United States every year. That's 11 women every day who are killed through wife abuse. So we're talking about a life-threatening situation. And we're going to be talking about these women, how their situation is a little bit different. What may work for people involved in these first 2 levels of sin may only make something worse down here at this level. This level is going to be a different level. So we are going to address it. But I want you to keep in mind that we are dealing with these first 2 levels where the anger is still where it can be reasoned with. So as we think about that, let's keep that in mind. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is that we want to talk about how to have a fair fight. How it is that husbands and wives can have a fair fight. Now, you know, women, we're the weaker vessel. We're not as strong as men. But women, by learning how to fight fair, women have a tremendous amount of power to take an argument and to turn it around and to teach their husband how to have a fair fight. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how to take a husband who doesn't know how to fight fairly, who fights dirty, and how to teach that husband so that he will fight fair, and you can change the course of the arguments, because women just simply have a tremendous amount of power in the arguments if they learn how to use their power right. Now, as we continue and we think about fighting fair and what fair fight is, remember in Proverbs 1, verse 3, a verse that we've looked at before about how that we're to learn how to conduct ourselves properly, how that our behavior is to be righteous and with justice and equity. And so when we talk about fighting fair, then we're talking about fighting so that our conduct is righteous, and there's justice involved in it, and there is equity, equal treatment of the husband and wife in this argument in the right way. Then in Ephesians 4, verses 26 to 27, let's turn over there right quick. This is the passage that we're all very familiar with. In Ephesians 4, verses 26 through 27, here it says, "Be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity." So here it is, he says, when you're angry, do not sin. Angry and anger in this passage come from 2 different words. They have a little bit of different meaning, but I was unable to really nail down what the difference between them is. The only thing I might think is that maybe it's just covering all of anger. Angry means to be provoked to anger, to be angry, to be raw, and it is sometimes translated became enraged. And then the word anger means indignation, exasperation, and wrath. So when you're angry, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Do not use it as an opportunity to sin. Do not give the devil an opportunity. This word opportunity means a place, indefinite, a portion of space viewed in reference to its occupancy or as appropriated to a thing. So if we allow anger to come into our lives and we're sinning with it, then we are giving the devil a space in our life, a space in our actions where he is going to be gaining control. Now, the first thing as women that we need to keep in mind if we're going to have a fair fight and we're going to control the fight is that we need to stop and we need to analyze our argument patterns with our husband. All arguments in different marriages have a pattern that they follow. It may be a pattern where he calls her names and she gets upset and she cries, or she runs to her room, or maybe the argument goes on for a little while and then he talks about her mother and she's just like her mother, or whatever it is. All couples have their own pattern, their own way of fighting. So the first thing a woman has to do is to sit down and analyze her argument pattern. What is the same from argument to argument? How do their arguments stay the same even though the subject matter changes? And once they can analyze the argument pattern, then they can plan a way to make this argument pattern change it so that it is fair fighting. So if we're going to first we analyze, then the next step is to prepare ahead to change. We analyze the argument, we prepare and we think about what do I need to do different to change the pattern of our arguments so that they are fair arguments. So you plan ahead. Then you practice in front of the mirror. And you practice, and it depends on how strong the arguments are, what the argument pattern is. But usually women need to put a lot of time practicing in front of the mirror. Getting in front of the mirror and practicing saying the things that need to be said, and we're going to talk about specific things to say to stop unfair fighting practices. So as these things we talk about, you practice in front of the mirror so that when you're in the heat of an argument and you can't think, then these things are going to pop into your mind because you have practiced them and they are there ready for you to use and you're not going to be on the spot. Then, if you fail, you get in an argument, you've prepared, you've planned, you've practiced, and here it is, your husband, he comes along and he gives you a chance, and you blow it, you lose your temper, you run to the bedroom in tears, and you fail, you didn't have control of yourself in this argument, then forgive yourself. Because if your husband is normal, he'll give you another chance. You'll have another time to have another argument with him and to practice again. And generally what it takes is it takes several times to learn for the woman to master these skills so that she can do what she needs to do. And then after she masters her skills, it takes several times to get the message across to the husband that, hey, our fights are going to change. They're not going to be the way they have been in the past. Wanda Trike is here. And I remember that when my daughter was a little baby, Wanda gave me some real good advice about children that has really been valuable to me. She said that she had learned with children, if they get in some kind of a bad habit, that it takes 3 good times of dealing with whatever it is they've decided to do before you can purge that bad habit out of them. Just one whipping for doing that one thing one time is not enough to change their behavior. It takes 3 good times. And so I've remembered that over the years and haven't expected instant success with my children. And I think that while our husbands are not our children, we need to realize that one good argument is not going to change the pattern of arguments that maybe have followed this pattern for years. It's going to take time and consistency and patience. But if a man is in these first two levels of sin, then it is going to bring about results. Hey, first thing to have a fair fight is you do your thing to cool off. In Proverbs 15, verse 1, let's turn over there and just notice some general passages for dealing with anger. In Proverbs 15, verse 1, it says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Then in Proverbs 25, verse 15, a similar passage, 25 verse 15, it says, by forbearance or patience, a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue breaks the bone. So there is power in a soft word. There is power in a soft tongue. And that's what we're going to learn how to do, is how to give a soft answer that will break bones, that will cool the husband's anger and bring about a fair fight. But the first thing we have to do is we have to take care of our emotions. We have to do our thing to cool off. And that means that when we're angry about something, if our husband periodically he says things, or in the pattern of our argument, certain things he says make us angry, we have to rise above our anger. We have to get control of our anger, because if we don't, then we cannot think clearly. And if we cannot think clearly, then we cannot teach our husband how to have a fair fight. Now, our thing to cool off, it may be to go for a walk or get involved in some kind of vigorous exercise, or maybe just a relaxing bath or a sauna will help control anger. Now, if the woman's problem is not anger, her problem is she ends up in tears, the woman has to learn how to control her tears. And women may think, oh, this is impossible. My tears just flow and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, the thing is that eventually a woman will control her tears. The thing is when are you going to do it? You can either choose to control your tears right now so that you can think clearly, or you can wait and let your marriage deteriorate, and then your tears will dry up, and then you won't have a problem with tears. And once the woman's tears have dried up because of bitterness and resentment, then she has hardened herself, and that marriage is in danger, and it is harder to bring about a change in that marriage because her attitude has changed. So what the woman needs to do, if crying is a problem, is she needs to learn how to control her tears, and she can do it. She can do it by practicing in front of the mirror, by practicing saying the things that we're going to learn to say in response to the things that make her cry. She can think clearly. She can have a cool head because she knows what to do and because she has practiced. And the issue, when we are learning to fight fairly, the issue is not what we are arguing about. That is unimportant. The issue is learning to fight fair. And if we can keep that in our mind, the issue is to teach our husband how to learn to fight fair and to teach ourselves how to fight fair, then any problem we have later on in life, we can face it and we can solve it together. So the issue is not what we're arguing over at this moment. The issue is learning how to fight fair. So we have to practice in front of the mirror and be prepared to deal with the problems. But first of all, we need to make sure that our heart is right, that our tears aren't flowing because we are contentious, because we don't want to give in. We always want our way. We don't want our husband to tell us what to do. If we have this kind of attitude and our tears are tears of contentiousness, then this is something different and we need to take care of that attitude. Then if we're involved in an argument and things get out of hand and we're unable to deal with them, call time out. Say, I need time to cool off. I need time to get control of my emotions. And call time out and break the fight up, not to just break it off, but break it off for a temporary period of time. Then, again, as we've talked about before, controlling the tears is something a woman may not be able to do perfectly the first time. She may fail, and if she fails and still cries and she still blows it, runs to the bedroom bawling and nothing is solved, then she can forgive herself and she can determine to do better because there will be another time. She will have another chance. Women can be calm and level-headed in their arguments. They can control their tears, they can be calm, and they can be level-headed. And if they will work towards this goal, then they are going to have a tremendous amount of power in an argument. You know, when a husband is ranting and raving, and his wife is sitting there calm, cool, and collected, and she knows what she's going to say. She knows how she's going to respond to him judging her motives and whatever else it is unreasonably says to verbal abuse. If she is calm and cool-headed, then she has tremendous power. And that husband notices how calm and cool she is, and it has a tremendous effect on her. The key, and I'm going to emphasize this from time to time, is practice in front of the mirror. Spend time in front of the mirror thinking and practicing over and over what you're going to say so that these words will be natural on your lips and so that you can respond appropriately. So every time you see the mirror, think, I need to practice. I need to think about these things. Now, as we continue to think about fighting fair, the first most obvious thing is argue with the right person. Now, this is obvious, but yet it isn't obvious. Husband comes home from work. He's had a bad day. And so what does he do? He kicks the dog when he walks in the house, and he yells at his wife, and they have a big argument. And she thinks they're fighting over supper, that supper wasn't exactly like what he wanted. But really, they're fighting over the mess that he left at work and his frustration with his boss. And do you know she can't win that argument? because they're not fighting over the right thing. He's not fighting with the right person. And so he is angry and frustrated at something that has absolutely nothing to do with her. So we need to argue with the right person. When someone is arguing with the wrong person, then this is called dumping. Sometimes mothers get angry at their husband, and so they are irritable with their children, and they dump on their children. They take it out on their children. So we need to argue with the right person. In Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17, we've talked about this before, that if we have a problem with someone, then we are to go to that person and take care of the problem with that person. Now, if we're going to fight fair and we're going to teach our husband how to fight fair, then we don't let our husband dump his work problems on us. If he comes home and he's had a bad day and he's kicking the dog and he's grousing about dinner that it's not on time and it's not, he doesn't like this and this sort of thing, then because we're calm and cool-headed, then we tell him, it is not right for you to take your problems with your boss out on me. It's not right for you to take your problems with your job out on the dog. It's not right for you to take your problems out on the children. And so we don't let him dump on us, dump his work problems on us. We point this out to him. We don't do it in an ugly way. But instead of trying to answer his accusations about the meal when that really isn't the problem, then we deal with the issue. Then we argue about the right thing. Now this might seem obvious, but yet many times it isn't. So in Ephesians 4:25, where it's talking about arguing, we want to just notice this general principle about the way we are to speak to other people. In Ephesians 4, verse 25, it says, "Therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." So we are to lay aside falsehood, and we are to speak truth. Falsehood means a lie, conscious and intentional falsehood, in a broad sense, whatever is not what it professes to be. So when something is not what it professes to be, it is a falsehood. We are to speak truth. Truth is universally what is true in any matter under consideration. And it's opposed to what is feigned, fictitious, or false. You know, the husband may come home and he may pick at his wife because of the way she's cooking, when really that is not the problem. He is irritated and irritable because perhaps she refused him sexually the night before or a couple of nights before, and he's irritated at her for that. And instead of telling her that he feels frustrated sexually, he picks on her cooking, or he picks on her driving, or he picks on some other thing instead of dealing with the problem. But do you know women are the same way? Women pick on their husbands because they spend so much time at work and they're never at home. And really what they're feeling is emotionally neglected. And instead of telling their husband, I need more time with you, I need my emotional desire satisfied, then they pick on him because he hasn't mowed the lawn, or he hasn't done this, or he hasn't done something else. He's spending too much time at work instead of dealing with the problem. So if we're going to deal with problems and solve problems and fight fair, then we need to argue about the right thing. Find out what's really bothering him. Find out what is really bothering her. Now, many times it is very hard to share the real problem because we are making ourselves vulnerable really to our husbands when we share the real problem with him. Maybe a woman might, in fact, I know of one girl who was having problems adjusting to new motherhood. And she was having to deal with all kinds of feelings about taking care of a baby and getting up during the middle of the night. And she was having problems of resenting the baby. And she tried to share this with her husband. And her husband, instead of realizing that she needed to talk her way through and needed some emotional support, he immediately jumped all over, "Oh, you horrible, wicked person." And he ran and told all of his relatives what a horrible mother she was. And really, all she needed was to talk through some feelings to her husband. She needed to be able to share the real problem with him, and yet he was not reacting in the right way. In order to share, there must be love and trust. And this is something that husbands and wives are going to have to work towards. If a woman's husband, if she shares like this young girl shared this problem, "I've just got this baby, I'm overwhelmed, I'm fighting all kinds of feelings," and he's running and telling everyone what a horrible mother she is, then she needs to come back and tell him, it's his responsibility as the husband to help his wife, to support his wife. And let's turn over to Ephesians 5, verses 26 through 27. Of course, this is a section of Scripture where it's talking about the man as being the head of the woman. And in verse 26 it says, talking about Christ, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the blood, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and blameless. So this is an example of how Christ took care of the church. He did the things for her so that she could be holy and sanctified, so that she could be blameless and without spot. Christ supplied what the church needed. He built her up. And this is a husband's responsibility. So a wife may have to teach her husband if he is neglecting her responsibilities and is not supporting her. Tell him, this is your responsibility. I should be able to share my deepest fears, my deepest weaknesses with you and find support, find help in being able to deal with it. The same is true with the husband. The husband should be able to come to his wife and to share his fears. He should be able to go to her and tell her, I'm scared about my job at work. I feel like I'm being passed over, and I feel like maybe I'm next in line to be laid off, and I'm really worried if I'm able to do this job properly. The husband should be able to share these fears with his wife and to not have them used against him then later as an argument against him. In Proverbs 31, the story of the description of the woman of great price, we find that the woman of great price had this quality, and it was something that was very precious to her husband. In Proverbs 31, verses 11 and 12, it says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. So here it is, his heart trusts in her. And because it trusts in her, he has no lack of gain, and she's always doing him good. This quality of being able to argue about the right thing and to truly share concerns and weaknesses and flaws in our life, this ability is worth working for. And it's something that a couple may not have in the beginning, but it's a goal to have, to work for, where a wife can tell her husband anything. She can tell him her deepest fears, her deepest faults, where he can tell her anything. And they know that there's going to be love and support and help for overcoming them. So it's worth working for. Now, while we're talking about the right thing, avoid side issues. You know, children are really adept at bringing up side issues when you try to talk to them about something, and so are husbands. Now, a wife or a mother can use an example, and what they'll do is they'll focus in on some little teeny tiny part of your example, or some little teeny tiny part of what you're griping about that has nothing to do with the problem, but it's something they can prove you wrong on. It's something they can make a big issue, and they'll turn the argument around. And here it is, you're arguing about something different, a side issue. And some people are masters at this. Some kids are masters at this. And if this is part of the pattern of your argument, then you need to deal with it. And what you need to practice saying in the mirror is, you're missing the point. You do not discuss side issues. That is getting away from the point of the argument, the right thing, and over you say, you're missing the point. If you have to say it 10 times before they get the point, say, you're missing the point. And if we make that be part of our vocabulary where it just instantly comes out when our children do this, it saves a lot of problems with them, and it saves a lot of problems with husbands. And if a husband is having to teach his wife how to argue, then it saves a lot of problems with wives, because women also are very good at having side issues. Then, as we continue thinking about how to have a fair fight, the next point is, not only do we argue about the right thing, but we argue at the right time. In 1 Samuel 25, verse 19, of course you're going to recognize this. This is the story of Abigail and Nabal that we talked about earlier. Abigail knew this principle of fair fighting, to argue at the right time. In 1 Samuel 25, verse 19, it says, and this is after the young men had come to her and told her that Nabal had refused David. In verse 19 it says, and she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So she knew that he was not going to do this, and that he might prevent her from doing it, and she did not tell him. But she did tell him at the right time. In verses 36 through 37 it says, after she met David and came back. It says, then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. So she didn't tell him anything while he was drunk. And in our class last week, we talked about how people that are drunk, who are given to alcohol, how it brings on contentions and it brings on woes, how they cannot think clearly, how this is a good way to have an argument, is to try to talk to someone who is involved in drinking. So Abigail knew this, and she did not talk to Nabal then. But what she did was in verse 37, it says, but it came about in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, that his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, so that he became as a stone. So she waited until he was sober, till that he could think more clearly and he could react more clearly, and then she told him. So, argue at the right time. And if a woman needs to talk to her husband about some kind of abuse that he's involved in, or some kind of sin, or perhaps he's neglecting her sexual needs, or he's neglecting the children, whatever kind of sin it might be, then she needs to choose the right time. The right time is not in the middle of a fight to bring up all of these other things that she needs to talk to him. When he's already out of control, is not the time to tell him, I'm not going to be doing this and I'm not going to be doing that in arguments. And a little bit later, when we've covered more of this, what we're going to see is that a woman is going to have to tell her husband, in the past, we've judged motives in our fights. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to allow you to do that anymore. So as we learn how to have a fair fight, a woman is going to have to sit down with her husband and say, things are going to be different. I've learned better. And we've been involved in a lot of sin in our fights, and we're not going to do that anymore. So she needs to pick the right time to tell him. She doesn't do this in the middle of a fight the first time that she tells him. Okay? And the right time is when there is enough time to finish. You don't start telling him about something he's involved in, some sin he's involved in, while you're getting dressed to go to dinner at somebody's house and you've just got 15 minutes or something. You pick a time when there is enough time to finish, whether it's going to take 30 minutes or an hour or hours. The woman is going to have an idea because of the way the pattern of the fights in her family. And so she picks a time when there is enough time to finish. You don't fight in front of the kids. Now, many of these wife abusers, verbal abusers and such, they will make the ugliest remarks about their wife in front of their kids. And this is absolutely something that a woman should not permit, because it is very damaging to these kids in their view of their mother. It is destroying the mother's authority over her children. At the shelter, they say that these kids have heard Daddy say so many times that mother is stupid, mother's dumb, mother can't do anything, mother's clumsy, mother's this, mother's that. That when these women come into the shelter with their kids, these women have absolutely no control over their children, because the children have no respect for their mother. So this is something that damages the mother's relationship with her children, and is something that she absolutely should not permit or tolerate. Okay, the right time is not in front of company. Sometimes husbands like to bring up gripes and complaints. Sometimes women do too, in front of company. And they'll say, isn't that right, honey? And what can honey say? He's put on the spot and he can't chew her back out. And he's put on the spot and he looks like a fool no matter what he does, or she does too. And so the right time is not in the middle of a fight. It's when there's enough time to finish. It's not for the kids. And it's not in front of the company. And she's going to have to choose, be in control, and choose the right time to have a fight. I have a cartoon up here about a lady who obviously does not know about the right time to have a fight. As you can see, they're out relaxing here on the bank fishing, and the man, he's all relaxed and stretched out, and she says, while we have a little peace and quiet, let's work on some of your faults. Well, obviously, this is not the right time. This man is going to resent her working on his faults at this time, and is not going to be paying attention. Now, if we're learning how to fight fair, we don't bring up past fights. In Colossians 3, verses 12 through 13, is just a general principle about forgiveness. And there's several things involved in not bringing up past fights that we want to notice. In Colossians 3, verses 12 through 13, it says, "And so, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other, whoever has a complaint against anyone. Just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you." So we need to forgive. And I have some things, and I have quite extensive notes in your notes about forgiveness, but I want us to notice together a few things about forgiveness. The person who is hurt, that's the offended party, does the forgiving and not the person being forgiven, the offender. Thus, in forgiveness, you bear your own anger and wrath at the sin of another. You voluntarily accepting responsibility for the hurt he has inflicted on you. And so what it's talking about, why is forgiveness so hard? Forgiveness is so hard because we're having to deal with the hurt and the pain of what the other person has done, and he goes on and doesn't suffer that same hurt. But forgiveness is letting go. It's letting go of the pain and the hurt. It's letting go and letting God take care of the vengeance. And if we're going to forgive, then we need to make a commitment to do 3 things to forgive. First, we make the commitment, I will not use it against my mate in the future. So if we've forgiven them, then we won't use it against them in an argument. And we also make the commitment, I will not talk to others about my mate. If we've forgiven him, then we won't tell others about this rotten, despicable thing that he did to us. Then if we forgive him, we make the commitment, I will not dwell on it myself. Now, this may be a hard thing to do, but the woman is making the commitment, or the man, if he's having to forgive, making the commitment that he's not going to dwell on it. And when it comes into his mind, then he will put more pleasant things into his mind, because he has chosen to forgive him, he has chosen to let go, he has chosen to let God take the vengeance. Now, and another aspect of this, of not bringing up past fights, is not using the past to win arguments. Maybe it's not a quality of a fight where something was brought up and had been forgiven, just something that happened in the past to win an argument. For example, one woman told me about how that being punctual on time was something that was very important to her. So she picked a good time to discuss this with her husband, because this was an area of conflict. And when she talked to him about how this is really important to me, I really feel self-conscious when I'm late, and she tried to help him understand her feelings, then he went back to the past. Well, you're not the perfect person you think you are. What right do you have to criticize me for not being late? Because sometimes you're sick and you don't even go to services at all. And so here's all these things to drag from the past, to cloud the argument, to try to win the fight. But this lady was smart. She didn't let him get away with it. She says, that's from the past. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. Time is important to me. It runs my whole day to not be on time. And what you're talking about, we can talk about that at a later time if we need to, but that has nothing to do with the issue that we're talking about right now. Then, as we continue to think about fighting fair, if we fight fair, that means there is no name-calling. In Ephesians 4, verse 29, Ephesians 4, verse 29, it says, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, that it may give grace to those who hear. So it says, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth. Unwholesome means rotten, putrid, corrupted by age and no longer fit for use, worn out, hence in general of poor quality, bad, unfit for use, worthless. Now, unwholesome includes a lot of names that husbands and wives call each other. There was one woman one time that what she did with her husband every time they get in an argument, she's someone who'd been very promiscuous before she was married and had a child out of wedlock. She had lived with many different men, and she had told her husband he knew about these instances, and some of these men she lived with, they were very bad situations, really mistreated her and really took advantage of her. So what she would do in the argument is these bad men who had mistreated her, she would compare her husband to these bad men that she had lived with and really make him feel like a rotten person in that way. So there's all kinds of name-calling and unwholesome words that come out of husbands and wives' mouth. But it says, use the words that are good for edification.
Edification means the act of building up, edifying, edification. The act of one who promotes another's growth in Christian wisdom, piety, holiness, and happiness. So edification is something that builds that person up instead of tearing them down. Sometimes husbands and wives will say, well, you're just like your mother, or you're just like your dad, and call them names that way, or call them names of people in society that are unwholesome. So there's all kinds of unwholesome names that they call. Okay? If this is a problem in a woman's arguments with her husband, if this is part of the patterns that she calls him names, or that he calls her names, and then she's reduced to tears, or she gets mad, then this is something she needs to practice dealing with in front of the mirror. She stands in front of the mirror and she practices saying, it doesn't help when you call me ugly names. You wouldn't like for me to call you ugly names. It only clouds the issue. I want you to stop calling me names. So if that's a problem, she practices saying this little speech over and over and over again so that it is automatic. If the husband then appeals to his authority, well, I'm the boss, and I know one man, this is what I'm the boss. I can shout if I want to. I can say what I want to. I'm the boss. If he appeals to his authority, fine. Let's look at Ephesians 5:28 and see what it says about the man's authority. In Ephesians 5:28 it says, so husbands ought, and you remember that we said this word ought means he owes a debt, to love his own wife as his own body. He who loves his own wife loves himself. So just remind him, of course this is what we've got in this speech, you wouldn't like for me to call you ugly names. You are to love me as you love your own body. You are to treat me as you treat your own body. You don't want me to call you names. So again, if he appeals to his authority, then she tells him again, you don't deserve to be talked to the way you are talking to me. And I don't deserve to be talked to that way either. So she practices her little speech, knowing the pattern of her arguments, letting him know, you do not deserve to be talked to the way you are talking, and I do not deserve to be talked to this way. Now, the issue, no matter what they're fighting over, the issue has changed. The issue is the name calling. And the woman does not leave this new issue of name calling until it is settled. You stop arguing about who gets the car tomorrow, whatever it is you're arguing about. You stop arguing about that and you deal with the name calling. Because the issue, she has practiced her speech. No matter what the argument is about, this is just an opportunity to teach you how to fight fairly. So then she stops and deals with this. And you say this over and over and over. How many times it takes to get through to his thick skull. Name calling is no longer allowed in our arguments. You don't deserve to be talked to that way, and neither do I, and we cannot discuss the issue further until you are willing to deal with the name calling. If he stops calling her names for a little bit and then he backslides, then bring out this speech again and say it again. And remember what Wanda said, it may take 3 arguments or more before the message gets through, but it will get through. Then, be a good listener. Proverbs 18, verse 13. Proverbs 18, verse 13. Here it says, in verse 13 it says, he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. You know, how many husbands and wives try to anticipate what their mate is going to say, and their mate can hardly get the words out of their mouth, and then the other one is already answering what he thinks they're going to say. Well, this proverb is dealing with that. If a man gives an answer, if he answers an argument before he hears it, if he assumes he knows what she's going to say, then it's a folly and a shame to him. So maybe we need to practice saying this proverb over and over in front of the mirror. If a man gives an answer before he hears it, it is a folly and a shame to him. What this means is, if a woman's husband interrupts her and tries to answer arguments that she hasn't even said yet, then this is the speech she practices. I don't interrupt you, and if you interrupt me, you can't possibly know what I'm going to say. And you do not answer what he has just said to you in answer to what he thinks you're going to say. Because he has interrupted you, he does not know what you're going to say, and then all of a sudden you see how the issue's blown out of all proportion because she's trying to say something to him and he's not understanding. He's twisting it around and he is assuming she's going to say something else, and he's over here arguing now about something else. So if she flies over there and tries to argue about this new issue, then this argument is totally out of control. So we can exercise by control by remaining calm, no tears, calm voice, looking at him calmly and sweetly saying, I don't interrupt you. And if you interrupt me, you can't possibly know what I'm going to say. Now, do wives ever interrupt their husbands? Yeah. So guess what happens? Wives better quit interrupting their husbands, before they can make this little speech. So what she needs to say is, I don't intend to interrupt you in the future, and I don't want you to interrupt me. Because when I interrupt you, I don't know what you're going to say. It changes the issue. It gets the argument off track. So if she needs to correct this in her life, she needs to do that first before she jumps him out about it. Now, when we're being a good listener and we're really understanding what he's saying, then he's understanding what we're saying, we may not agree with each other, but we can understand. So our goal is not necessarily to agree, but to understand. Understand his views, understand his feelings, for him to understand her views and understand her feelings. Then, don't jump to conclusions. Here it is, he has said something, we haven't interrupted him, we've listened to him. Even though we haven't interrupted him and we've listened to him, don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume you know what he's saying. Don't assume he is saying what he means. Because I know many times my husband and I are in meetings together. We both hear the same things people say. We go home and he'll say, well, what did you think about what so-and-so said? I sure took it this way. And I said, I didn't take it that way at all. I took it this way over here. And we've done that over and over. We've heard the same speech by somebody. He took it one way and I took it the other way. And maybe both of us are wrong. Maybe neither one of us knew what the person meant. So don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume that what he is saying is what he means. Here's some more words for you to practice. What do you mean? Tell me more. I don't understand. So make him explain more thoroughly what it is he's saying. And then after you've said these three phrases, what do you mean? Tell me more. I don't understand. Then you paraphrase what you think he said. And you say, are you saying such and such? And he may say, yes. Or he may say, no, you missed it a mile. And he'll go back and try to correct it. So be a good listener. Find out what he means. Find out what he's really trying to say. And then by us being good listeners, it's going to make him be more of a good listener with us and pay more attention to what we are saying also. Now, when we're trying to communicate with husbands, and we think about husbands being good listeners and wives being good listeners, here's a little cartoon about High and Lois that kind of represents the problem sometimes with husbands. You know, sometimes it's very hard to communicate with husbands and to get the message across to them. Here's High, he talks to Lois, and he says, what's wrong with our marriage? And she says, I think we've got communication problems. Here's his answer. He says, I told you we shouldn't have switched from AT&T. So here it is. He's completely missed the point. Yeah, they've really got communication problems. And sometimes this is the way it is with husbands. It's really hard sometimes to talk to a husband about a problem and to have him really understand what it is that a woman is saying. Or perhaps he understands it then and then he goes away and he forgets. So women need to learn how to be patient and how to keep trying and working at communication. Then, as we're talking about fighting fair, don't judge motives. Now, we've been talking about over in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 11, how no man knows the thoughts of another unless that man tells him. But I want us to notice a proverb that has to deal with judging motives. In Proverbs 10, verse 18, it says, he who conceals hatred has lying lips, and he who spreads a slander is a fool. Many times what judging motives is spreading slander. It is slandering the other person. Slander means defaming, evil report, infamy, slander, and it is used for a report of evil character. And usually the motive judging that causes problems in arguments is a report of evil character. And this proverb says someone who spreads slander, who spreads a report of evil character, then that person is a fool. That person is not arguing wisely. So if we're going to have fight fair, then the wife, is not going to judge motives, neither is she going to permit her husband to judge her motives. And this is something that a wife can teach her husband. And it doesn't matter how bad her husband is involved in judging motives, she can teach him it doesn't work. You can't do this in our marriage. So first of all, if she's doing it, she's got to quit. She's got to stop it because she can't teach him if she's still doing it. Then, if she wants to know what his motives are, if she asks him what his motives are. If he's done something that doesn't look quite right, she needs to know what his motives are, and so she needs to ask. Then she needs to tell her mate, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so in these things like judging motives and name calling, it's not enough to just stop them if a woman has been doing them in the past. She needs to tell her mate, I've done this in the past, it's wrong, and I am not going to do it anymore. So she needs to tell him. She needs to pick a good time. Not in the middle of an argument, but pick a good time and say, I realize that we do a lot of motive judging in our arguments, and that is bad. And I want you to know that I've repented of that, and I'm not going to do it anymore, and that I'm going to point it out to you when you judge my motives. So she needs to tell him that. Then when they're in an argument, and he's judging her motives, then whatever you do, don't answer wild accusations. If he makes wild accusations and judges your motives, don't answer them, because if you answer them, you're just encouraging him to keep doing it. What you do is you say what you have been practicing in front of the mirror. What you say is, you are judging my motives. You don't know that. Well, I don't care, but you just, and he goes on, and you're calm and you're cool, you say, you are judging my motives. You don't do that. You don't know that. And see what I have down here? Repeat as often as necessary. The wilder the accusations get, you just keep repeating this over and over and over like a broken record till the message gets through. And you do not answer wild accusations. You make him ask you why you did something. And then when he asks you, you can tell him why you did it. And you don't have to answer these wild accusations. So in front of the mirror, practice, you are judging my motives. You don't know that. And so over and over, you might shorten it after you said that several times, and he says, well, you did such and such. You say, you don't know that. You don't answer it, you just say, you don't know that. Well, and you can just see him getting upset. I'm sorry, but you don't know that. You remain calm, cool, and collected, and eventually it's going to get through to this guy that this gal is not going to answer my wild accusations, and if I want to know why she did something, then I'm going to have to ask her. Women have tremendous power to teach their husbands not to judge motives, and if they will practice in front of the mirror and be prepared, then they can do it. Then, if we're going to fight fair, finish the fight. Don't give in, don't go off and leave a fight half fought. In Proverbs 15, verse 22, Proverbs 15, verse 22, it says, without consultation, plans are frustrated, but with many counselors, they succeed. You know, one of the benefits of a marriage that we have is that you have a man and a woman, and they think differently, and they feel differently, and they react differently. And when you put a man and a woman together and you let them discuss an issue, when you let them discuss a problem and they're working on it together, then they are going to come up with a better solution than either one of them would by themselves. And so this is why it is important to finish the fight. Don't leave all kinds of half-settled issues. Don't sweep arguments under the rug and avoid the issues, because by many counselors, then a plan is, what does it say in verse 22? It says, without consultation, if you're just off doing something by yourself, then plans are frustrated. If a woman's figuring it out on her own, or a husband figuring it out on his own, their plans are frustrated. But with many counselors, they succeed. By working on it together, then they're going to have a greater chance of finding success. So you finish the fight, not until one of them is just wounded beyond repair, but until you find a solution. The whole point of this argument is to find a solution. So that means you don't walk out, you don't resort to tears and run to the bedroom to end the fight. You stay there, you work at having control of your emotions so that you can see it through to a solution. Now, part of the solution may be that this is a big problem, And we agree to continue discussing it later after we've had a chance to think about it and study it some more. So this is a possible solution, that this is something we're going to have to work on for a while. Now there are 4 basic solutions to every argument. One is capitulation, where one mate gives in. Now, one mate gives in because it is right to give in. And it shouldn't be the same mate giving in every time just because the other one is bigger and stronger and browbeats her so that she does give in. The mate gives in because it is right to give in. And in healthy marriages where husbands and wives fight fair, they know how to have a fair fight, it is both mates give in at different times. Both mates can admit, I'm wrong, and give in to the other. Okay, another solution is a compromise, where both give in some. He gives up some of what he was holding out for, she gives in some of what she was holding out for, and there is a compromise. Then there is coexistence. Learn to live with the situation. Now, this lady we were talking about earlier, where time was so important to her. And this is something that is important to a lot of people. There are a lot of husbands that get very frustrated because their wives and their families are always making them late for services or for going over to someone's house. And so what may have to happen is the wife or the husband, who time does not matter to, who doesn't care if you're 15 or 30 minutes late, they may have to realize this is important to my mate, and I am going to have to accept it, and I'm going to adjust my life and learn to live with that. Yet you learn to live with it in love instead of resentment and bitterness. Then the 4th solution up here is that you may create an entirely new solution, that when both of you started this argument, you wanted things to end up a certain way, that neither one of you had ever thought of this new solution, and so you come up with a brand new solution. In the business world, they call this brainstorming. This is something that is very, they call it networking. I guess brainstorming is the old-fashioned word. Now the word is networking. People, they get together with other counselors, with other professionals, and they network. They hash over a problem to find solutions, to solve problems. A husband and wife team ought to be the greatest networking team imaginable in solving problems, if you finish the fight. But if you run off to the bedroom in tears, then nothing was solved, no solution was fought. You're either going to have to fight about it again, or you're going to sweep it under the rug and you're going to allow resentment and bitterness to grow in that marriage. Okay, if we're fighting fair, then when we're wrong, admit it. In Matthew 5, verses 23 through 24, in Matthew 5, verses 23 through 24, here it says, If therefore you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. I think we've talked about this before, how that God really cares about how we treat other people. This is more important to God than the sacrifices and the offerings that we bring to Him religiously. Now that's important. It's important to serve God right religiously, but the way we treat other people is more important. So if we're wrong, admit it. Pride is something that separates us from God, and pride is the most worthless thing there is for solving problems. But if we want to solve problems, then we need to get rid of our pride. We need to be able to admit it when we're wrong. And if we can do that, then we are setting an example and an environment for our husband so that he can admit when he is wrong. Then we want to notice the example of Jesus, how that Jesus dealt in the world of men and injustices. And we want to turn over to John 18, verse 21, and see that Jesus corrected injustices. John 18, verse 21. Okay, and here it says, Jesus is talking this was after he had been arrested right before his death, and he says, "Why do you question me? Question those who have heard, and question those who have heard what I spoke to them. Behold, these know what I said." So he's asking them, where's the witnesses? This is an injustice in here. You should have witnesses testifying to what I spoke. It says, "And when he had said this, one of the officers standing by gave Jesus a blow, saying, 'Is that the way you answer the high priest?'" And so here it is. Jesus was
It kind of sounds like the officer hit him in the mouth for talking this way. It says Jesus answered him. Jesus didn't just cower down before this injustice. Instead, what it says in verse 23, Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, bear witness of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" So here it is. He's calling this man to account. That if I've done something wrong, then you testify to what it was wrong. But if I've done something right, then why did you strike me? So Jesus corrected injustices. Also, another way that Jesus dealt with problems is that he quoted Scripture. In Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11, I'm not going to read this whole section. This is after Jesus was baptized and he went out into the wilderness and Satan tempted him there. And you remember every time that Satan tempted Jesus, Jesus came back and quoted Scripture to him. And finally, after Satan had tempted him in every way, he left him. And so Jesus' way of dealing with this severe temptation was to quote Scripture. So as wives, what we need to realize is follow Jesus' example. If our husband is not fighting fair, if he is judging motives, if he's calling names, then do like Jesus did. Point it out. If I've done something wrong, then bear witness to that. But if I haven't done something wrong, then why are you treating me this way? And then a woman needs to know these scriptures that deal with fair fighting. Because even if she's living with a man who is not a Christian, she needs to let him know that the Bible is guiding her life. She is following biblical principles. So if she points out injustices, you don't know that, you're judging my motives, and doesn't give in to answering the false accusations. This is what Jesus did in this instance where they were accusing him falsely. He didn't answer their wild accusations, but he says, "Bring forth your witnesses. Let them testify to what I've done." Then a wife needs to realize it takes persistence to learn to teach a husband how to fight fair. It's not going to happen in one fight. Now, it may happen in 3 fights or it may not. It depends on how long they've been going on and how deeply ingrained the habits are. Be patient, because you're going to feel good about yourself. If you are in control of yourself, then you're going to be in control to a large degree of the situation, and you're going to feel good about yourself, and you need to be patient. Okay, I have here a cartoon about the Lockhorns, and she has a problem with being able to admit that she's wrong. Here it is, she's serving her husband breakfast, and she tells her husband, "Of course I can admit my mistakes. I admit marrying you." So here it is. I'm admitting it, but I'm dumping it all right back on you. Okay, I'm going to stop right there.